Welcome to Figments on Reality, rebooted to a new shorter format to allow us to quickly address matters that matter. And today's matter, August 5th, 2024, is Sue Me Terry, the influenced influencer. Now, I wrote about this in Responsible Statecraft. I'd ask you to take a look at that article, but this format will allow me to go into a little more detail on this case and tell you more about why I think it's important to the United States and to United States policymaking. And I'll give some recommendations about steps to take to ensure that our policy is independent and not influenced by foreign powers. Okay, now, maybe you don't know Sue Me Terry. I certainly knew of her. I've never met her, but she's a rock star in the Korea policy world inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. Worked at the CIA, as I said, later the National Security Council, the National Intelligence Council. A prolific author, has given a lot of congressional testimony. She even produced a movie, Beyond Utopia, about an escape from North Korea. And she must be smart. She's got a PhD in international relations, and she is truly an insider. In her Washington circle is Max Boot, who's also her husband and a Washington Post insider. She's allegedly authored articles with him at the request of a foreign power. She's also a friend of Jung Pak, until most recently, the senior State Department official on matters regarding North Korea. So I'm interested in North Korea. That drew me to this case, and now I'll try to tell you why this indictment should matter. If you look at the indictment, it's pretty soap opera-like, frankly. It charges that she advocated ROK, Republic of Korea, South Korea policy positions, and disclosed U.S. government information that wasn't to be disclosed, and facilitated access to U.S. government officials by South Korean officials. If you want to get specific, she's said to have participated in an off-the-record meeting with Secretary of State Blinken and having provided those notes to a ROK government official. Who are these government officials? They're members of the Republic of Korea, South Korea again, National Intelligence Service. So they're spies. Now, every nation has spies, and we know they're in Washington and some work in embassies, but this is an allied power, not an adversary, seeking to influence U.S. policy. What did Sue Me Terry get for this? Well, she was paid according to the indictment, and I have to acknowledge that she has not yet been found guilty, but the indictment says she was compensated in luxury goods, like purses, high-priced meals, like sushi, and $37,000, a little more than $37,000 in, and I'm quoting now from the indictment, funding for a U.S. policy program. In doing all this and working for the ROK NIS, National Intelligence Service, she didn't report as she should have under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA. Now, there were concerns about her ties to South Korean intelligence agents for many years. The Department of Justice just finally got around to acting on it. So her influence is largely facilitated by think tanks. And as this indictment says, she's affiliated with at least 3 think tanks. And think tanks sound pretty lofty. They are. They seem almost academic, and certainly it could be seen as independent. And in fact, they quote in the indictment this definition of a think tank. The key words are highlighted. They're seen as independent sources of expertise. We see now that perhaps they're not so innocent. In fact, perhaps they're influenced by foreign governments. So what? The think tanks are really influential. In January of 2021, the Brookings Institution, one of the major think tanks, reported that it had placed 19 of its experts directly into policy jobs in the then new Biden administration. Among these were the aforementioned friend of Sue Me Terry, Jung Pak. Now, interestingly, before this indictment came out, Jung Pak was professionally disappeared. That sounds mysterious, but it is. Usually, when one leaves an appointed senior government position, there's an announcement and a fond farewell or something like that. She just disappeared. And when asked, a State Department official said, "Yeah, she's moved on and we wish her well." That got those of us who pay attention to things like this quite curious about it. And then came the indictment of her friend. I don't know if the two are related. The timing certainly is curious. Again, Jung Pak, like Sumi Terry, affiliated with think tanks. And these think tanks aren't just think tanks, they're big businesses. Okay? They rely largely on donations and grants, and some of those come from anonymous sources. Brookings Institution, I'm not picking on them, just a good example or one to reference, reported in its most recent annual report anonymous donations, and that's how they're labeled, for between $2 million and $6.3 million. Now, why can't I be more precise than that? Because of the way they report it. It's listed in a range, and taking the minimum could be 2 million, the maximum 6.3 million. Now, to me, that's a lot of money. But these think tanks are much bigger business than that. The Council on Foreign Relations, another big think tank type institution, recently in its annual report said it has an endowment of $565 million. I'm not a financial expert, but I think that's over half a billion. That's a lot of money. Now, that means that they need money. They get money through outside interests, and those outside interests can be foreign affiliated. Some of the donors are foreign companies and organizations. Okay? So, what should we learn from this? Kind of what's the so what here of this? And I really want to emphasize this. This matters a lot. This is about how policy is made. It's about who makes it and what our policies are. And so I've got three lessons that I've learned. I think this case, the Sumi Terry case, shows the enduring failure of U.S. policy on North Korea. It has failed, okay? It's been advocated by these Washington insiders, and they've advocated an adversarial and transactional approach to diplomacy with North Korea that has been failing consistently since the end of the Cold War. Okay, promoted by these insiders who float from State Department to think tank to the White House to Capitol Hill, and they opine in Congress and at cocktail parties. And in the case of Korea policy, they've opined in ways that have not been helpful. Okay, we have not achieved our objectives. More on that in a bit. I think the role of finances in the think tanks has to be looked at. We can't underestimate the significance of foreign financial influence and foreign policy influence. So we've got to look at the role of the foreign policy insiders and their think tanks, and then examine how and why they form their views. Okay, now the Republic of Korea National Intelligence Service is a government organization of an ally. So why should we worry, right? We're friends, at least we're friends. It's not like Russia was trying to influence anything. Okay, well, maybe they are, but that's not what we're talking about today. Policies of allies don't always align fully, sometimes hardly at all. And while the indictment, so that matters, right? What they're advocating, and then Sumi Terry was apparently advocating, might not be in our best interests. It might be not even be in the ROC government's best interests, because they weren't ROC government officials, they were ROC National Intelligence Service officials. And as a subset of the government, the ROC National Intelligence Service has a deeply troubling history. Okay, they have a long history of bad behavior dating back to its founding days in 1961 as the Korean National Intelligence Service. They include murder, kidnapping, bribery, and election interference. Okay, so who's to say what they were trying to influence? Were they off on their own, very conservative, very anti-North Korea vector, or were they doing the bidding of the democratically elected leaders in South Korea. My view is that it was more likely the former than the latter, that this wasn't big rock government influence, this was NIS influence, and we should be concerned about that. Okay. So, what are my recommendations then? I do have some recommendations, of course, and here they are. First, because our policy has failed with regard to North Korea, is influenced by those who advocate for an adversarial and transactional approach that, by the way, puts denuclearization first. We need a different approach. We have not achieved anything of substance in the way we've been doing things. Our goals since the Cold War has been to stifle North Korea's nuclear ambitions, fail, to improve North Korean human rights, fail, and to improve the conditions for the non-elites in North Korea, fail. That's strike three, folks. We need to try something different, and that something different should be to make ending the Korean War a U.S. policy priority. Now, I don't have time in this new briefer, Figments on Reality, to go into detail there, but I do have a plan. You can find that on the U.S. Institute for Peace website in my article, It's Time to Resolve the Korean War. That's got some details of things the U.S. government has to do internally to get ready to move from a 71-year-old armistice to a lasting peace agreement in North Korea. I'm not, or with North Korea, I'm not advocating capitulation, surrender, or appeasement of the North at all. Read the article and you'll see what I am advocating. All right. Regarding the think tanks, we need full disclosure of their sources of gifts and donations. If they intend to influence U.S. foreign policy, we should know formally where that U.S. foreign policy or where that influence is coming from. Whose side are they on anyway? Okay. And regarding those 19 Brookings Institution folks who came right to the new Biden administration, I don't care which side of the aisle an institution is on, that's too much influence for a single organization. And we should limit the hiring for senior positions when folks are coming, most recently, from a think tank with foreign government funding. And clearly, the next recommendation, clearly we need to look deeply into ROC NIS and its role. We should do that with the cooperation and assistance of the ROC government. I am absolutely not against the ROC government. One of the great miracles of modern time is the transition to democracy in the Republic of Korea. I think it's more important than the ROC economic miracle, but their democracy is being undercut by this free radical agency, NIS. And we need to look at that and do something about it. Now, as I said, I'm not against the Republic of Korea, understatement, but I'm also not against foreign governments. And yet, I think that we need to recognize that all governments spy, all governments influence. How are our friends and partners and allies doing that with the U.S.? We have to take a serious look at that. And the two intelligence committees, Senate and House, and the White House should be briefed. And frankly, there should be an unclassified version provided to the American public. They're not enemies. They're not even frenemies. But they're also not the United States, and they weren't elected by anybody here. So we need eyes wide open and a full understanding of where influence might be coming from. Those are my recommendations to the three main points. Our policy has failed. Insiders and think tanks are influenced by money, and foreign intelligence services present a threat to our democracy and our policy making. I hope you found this interesting and you agree with me that this is a matter that matters, and I hope you will subscribe, click like, and tune in again for the next episode of Figments on Reality. And I'll also be back with the lighthearted Figments, The Power of Imagination, both brought to you by Phase Minus One LLC. Mahalo and aloha.
Echado y fue al miedo y a la pena.